So our topic at hand today is one of my kind of favorite topics to talk about. I really like talking about scopes. And we're going to talk about the difference between scopes and scanners because we use scanners probably every day, depending on what you do for a job, I guess. But scopes don't get utilized as often, I feel, or maybe even as often as they need to be used. So scanner versus scope, let's get into it. So we do have two different types of diagnostic tools, as we know. We got scanners and we got scopes. And when I think of a scanner, I like to think of it as a really nice compass. It's going to point you in the right direction, show you where you need to look, where you need to go. But it's only showing you half of what's going on under the hood. It's showing you as the effect, right, after it already happened. Now, a scope is going to pinpoint the cause of that problem. So we're talking about inputs and outputs, basically, right? So if we think about a vehicle's computer, let's think of it like a house. It's got a front door. It's got a back door. It's actually got two back doors, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But coming in my front door is going to be all my inputs, my coolant temp sensor, my NOx sensor, my oxygen sensor. All those inputs feed into this computer. Then the computer is going to process it however it is programmed to do so, and that's important to note because sometimes the manufacturer doesn't get that programming right. That's why we have these things called reflashes. Also inside this computer, not sure if you're aware, but there are different ways that the manufacturer processes these. We have the OBD2 side. We call it two different rooms, let's call it, because it's a house, right? So OBD2 room is going to be federally mandated scan data and code. So it's whatever the federal government says, hey, you have to have this information in there. And this is the threshold that it has to meet in order to set this code, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of things that they have to follow. Guidelines, I guess. And then in the VIN specific side, that is whatever the manufacturer decides that needs to be. So it could be that threshold to set a code could be higher, could be lower. All depends. Have you ever scanned a car all the way through and found no codes in the OEM side, but the engine light was still on? And then when you went in with the OBD2 side, or you went in with a code reader, you found like 2-3 codes. That happens because of those different thresholds that could be in there. So if I'm going to go in on a Snap-on tool and go in where it says scanner, that's going to be my OEM VIN specific side. We also can break through this wall and go on both sides. I'll show you that when we go live on the tool. And then to get into this OBD2 side, you would need to go in under OBD Direct in order to get all that information. You can get some of the information in scanner. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a minute. But two different processors, basically, two different sides of the tool, two different icons on the tool to use, right? Then, of course, to check any of the good or bad inputs, we're going to need to use a scope to see that. So if we're looking at just scanner data, we're on this side. If we're looking at with the scope, we're going to be on this side, hooked up to a component or something somewhere in the wiring harness before it gets to the computer. We need the right tool for the job, basically. So scan tool is going to be useful for codes, of course, pulling codes, pre and post scans, that sort of thing. Looking at the process data coming out the back of the computer. Functional tests. I'm going to take control of that computer and turn things on and off. Maybe even a scripted test that goes through and does an automated test on a system for me. And then, of course, resets and relearns after the fact. After I'm already done with the repair, I might need to reset, relearn something in order to bring it back to factory specs and move on from there. Now, for the scope, this is going to be things like checking voltages, checking current flow, checking pressure, checking resistance, checking temperature, things like that. Things that I need to check going into the computer, right? So scan tool's out usually, scope is in usually. There can be occasions where I'm checking an output side of a computer with a scope, right? But for all intents and purposes, it's ins and outs. You might think, well, why don't I just rely on the data that's coming out of the scan tool, right? It's processed data, like I said. So it's only as good as its programming. Now, back in the day when we first came out with scan tools, back in 1988 with the brick, if you were looking at data on the screen, if you're lucky, you probably had 5 data pits. Because back in the day, there really wasn't all that much for sensors. There's a coolant temp sensor and a couple other sensors, maybe a cam sensor or something like that, crank sensor. Not a lot of sensors on those older vehicles because they're fairly simple to operate, right? They're fairly simple to work on, carburetor or whatever. But back then, the data would go every few seconds if you were lucky. Because back then, the processors on the cars weren't all that fast, and the processor on the tool didn't have to be all that fast. Nowadays, though, you can have hundreds and hundreds of PIDs you need to go through, and these digital data readings can change 10 times a second or faster. And I don't know about you, but I have trouble reading things when it's changing 10 times a second. It's good data, it's useful, good for pointing me in the right direction, that compass we talked about, but it's too fast and often too much to comprehend. Now, of course, we have ways of thinning out the PIDs as well, but it's a lot. After that, a few years later, came out with a graphing scan tool. Now, pretty much any scan tool on the market out there, other than maybe some low-end code readers, can graph data. And what a graph is recorded history of those numbers on the previous screen plotted over time of that processed data. Right, so it's still coming out the back door of the OBD2 port, right? Now, it is useful for seeing trends. Am I seeing things getting better, things getting worse, or things just kaput? And there are some things that only get processed inside the computer, like misfire counts and AF sensor information, things like that. So it is useful for that, but once again, it is just one piece of the puzzle. And the major hurdle you have to get over is that the refresh rate on the scan tool isn't necessarily as fast as it would be looking at it direct. And this picture shows it pretty starkly here. So if I look at this data, this is processed data hooked up to the OBD2 port, reading data through the scanner on an oxygen sensor reading voltage. This part right here, this window, is a scope hooked up reading the same oxygen sensor at the same time. These two red boxes, oops, I went too far. These two red boxes show the same amount of time passing. And I think you'll agree there's a lot more detail in the scope pattern than there is in this data stream, right? And that is not really the scan tool's fault. It's more of the car's fault because it has to read that data, process the data, and then send that data stream to the scan tool. Read it, process it, send it, read it, process it, send it. Every time it makes that little round trip, you lose a little bit of fidelity in the data. And that's why, yes, it's helpful to have it, but you can't 100% rely on just data. You need to be able to double check things, especially if you suspect there might be a problem. A microsecond dropout or something like that, you definitely need to use a scope to do that. Here's another example I did just a few weeks ago. So this is, of course, scope hooked up to mass airflow sensor. And I see about 1.3 volts, fairly steady, a little bit of movement, but 1.3 volts here, 1.3 volts there. But if I look here, it goes up to 1.5 volts occasionally on the scanner. Now, this is just a very short period of time over here on the scope. But it would look to be, if you were just looking at the scanner side of things, you would be seeing like a huge spike right there, right? And that's just because of the auto ranging. It's only going 0.2 of a volt. And on this screen, we'd go from here to here, right? Not a huge jump right there. So you also need to understand what you're looking at and what you're reading, especially with auto scaling on scan tools nowadays, right? So here we go, just a little movie I recorded with that. So going up to 1.4, and then it goes up to 1.5. And then I revved it, loaded up the engine, went up to like 2000 RPM, whatever, or the brake torque. And you can see it's a huge difference on how quickly the scope is reacting versus how quickly the scanner is reacting. The scanner barely caught any of those changes at all, just because of the speed that I was revving the vehicle up. It was that sort of thing. So the difference really is in those details, right? So the peak of this one is 2.89, and this one says the peak is 2.6. And that's just right in here, 2.89, right? So you can see the cursor right there. Probably a little small to see, but 2.89, 2.6. So it's a couple tenths of a volt off. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that huge, but you're able to see way more detail, like I said, in the scope versus just relying on scanner data. And if I had a problem with a dropout or something like that in a mass airflow sensor, I'd be able to pick it up using a scope. Probably wouldn't be able to pick it up as easily using a scanner, if at all. So what is a scope anyways when I think about it? Scope is really just a window that I'm looking through to see what is this thing that I'm hooked up to, component, or what is this component doing in one of a few different ways. It's a measurement over time. That's it. The vertical part's the measurement, be it voltage, pressure, current, whatever, over time, which can be changed, right? 20 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, and 20 minutes, whatever that time base needs to be on whatever I'm looking at. So injector pulse is one thing that we could read, right? We can read it in the scan tool, and we can read it in the scope. So if I want to look at this in a scope, I can check a fuel injector 3 different ways. I can check it electrically to make sure the circuit and the driver is working. That's this yellow wire right here, a yellow line right here. I can check mechanically with using the current flow going through it. So this is the current right here, and that's the green line. And then we also have the pressure of the fuel going through there, and that is this blue line, right? So fuel pressure. So we can see when it opens up, this is where it opens, or at least it's commanded to open. We can see the fuel pressure drop a little bit. Now in this particular vehicle, it doesn't drop too much, but when it closes, which is this line right here, you can see a big spike in that pressure because it was feeding fuel through the injector, and then all of a sudden that door shut on the end of it. So it's got a bunch of other fuel behind it adding up, and then it just kind of gets kicked back a little bit, and then it was noticed by the pressure sensor, and then it just kind of petered out after that, right? This goes up and then came back down. It's even 35 psi on either side. All right. And then we have over here where we can check screen and screen, right? So this is the scope pattern. Now remember, this is an output. This is not what the injector is actually doing. This is what the injector is doing moving. We want to see it open right here. But this is the commanded on time of the injector right here. And according to my cursor, I am seeing 3.33 milliseconds from commanded open to commanded close. And wouldn't you know it, at the same time, 3.33 milliseconds there. All right, so they match. So it's commanding 3.3 milliseconds, and it is sending out 3.3 milliseconds. So that's a check that I can do. Next one's a timing issue. So this is a very popular test that I've seen many people ask for known good patterns for, right? So if you're in any Slapscope Facebook groups or mechanic Facebook groups, oftentimes one of the most common posts is, hey, does anybody have a known good cam crank for X? Whatever it happens to be. So having a known good is pretty necessary for this, but in this example, this one happens to be a known good on my Subaru Forester. The yellow line is the crank sensor. It is an analog crank sensor, so it goes on either side of 0. In this case, one side of the reluctor wheel has 2 openings, and then the other side has 1 opening, so you know where top and bottom are. So you see a double gap and a single gap. Double gap, single gap, double gap. The blue line is one of the cam sensors. The green line is the other cam sensor. There's 2 cam sensors on this vehicle. So you see the blue line lines up within that gap. Blue line lines up in the gap, in the gap, in the gap. So that's good. Green line also lines up in the gap, in the gap, in the gap. So based on the combination of double gaps and single gaps and wherever the pulses are for the cam sensor, because notice there's no pulse on the blue here and there's no pulse on the green here. So they're kind of offset a little bit from each other. And that's normal. That's the way this car is supposed to look. Now, what happens if I have a stretched timing chain, or maybe the belt jumped, or whatever it happens, depending on what timing system you have on a car. So what happens if that happens? Well, now I see my blue line's good, but my green line is shifted to the left. That means the blue line is happening, or the green line is happening before it's supposed to happen. So that would mean advanced, right? If you think about it. So it happens before it's supposed to happen, so it advanced. Conversely, if it happens after it's supposed to happen, that would mean it's retarded, right? So it happens after it happens. So being able to kind of understand where everything is in relation to each other, that's the beauty of a scope, is being able to see the relationships between multiple things on the same time base, right? How about ignition? I love testing ignition because you can tell an awful lot about what's going on inside that cylinder just by looking at the ignition pattern. Here's an example of a known good vehicle. This is after a tune-up, and this is a cranking test to check the firing lines. On a good vehicle, the firing lines should be fairly even. If there's no issues with the vehicle, they should be firing at roughly the same voltage. There's going to be a little bit of variance because of how the vehicle works, but in this case, they're all fairly close to each other. That'd be considered normal. This one is when we're in the middle of doing the tune-up on this vehicle, and you can see this firing line is considerably higher than all the rest. The other ones are fairly close to each other. This one's considerably higher. Why was that? Had about 120,000-ish miles, 1,000 miles on it. So that gap, as you can imagine, on the spark plug was considerably wider than one on a brand new spark plug. So with that, we can see the firing line that needs to go, the voltage required to cross that larger gap. So we would understand that, hey, there's something causing excess voltage to be needed across that gap. In this case, most likely a warm spark plug. You can also check that. So that's the firing line. You can also check the spark line to see how things are going. This is very helpful. So in this case, this is normal. We see it's pretty flat. Got a little bit of turbulence in there, and the turbulence is part of the actual combustion process happening. Because when you have combustion, you're going to be a little richer in this part, a little leaner in this part, and that will affect the voltages that are happening when the spark is happening as the flame propagates. It's kind of like crazy nerd stuff, but when it's fairly flat, that's good. And then we see a little oscillation there. That's just coil oscillation. That's normal too. Same vehicle, same cylinder, same same plug. Decided to pinch off the fuel line going to the vehicle itself, off the fuel filter. Pinched it off with some pinch pliers, just enough so it would stay running, but it was running like garbage because it was running lean. Here's normal amount of fuel, then it ran out of fuel. What happens when it runs out of fuel? It goes lean. So lean means up on when it comes to ignition. So it will increase the amount of ignition voltage needed to keep that spark going because there's less fuel. It's more air. Air makes it more difficult. And it's less resistance. And then, no, I don't have another one. All right. So that is lean. Conversely, going down at the end would be rich. Or like starting down and then kind of looping up at the end would be rich. Fuel pump current. This is another good one you can do. By putting a low amp probe somewhere in my fuel pump circuit, be it the fuse or the relay or anywhere in the circuit somewhere, I can check the rotational speed of that pump. I can also check the condition of the commutator segments in that pump. Now, this is a normal brushed fuel pump. We do have brushless fuel pumps out there in the world now. It's completely different. We do have other classes on just those things. So if you want to look those up on the YouTube channel, that's fine. That'll get you where you need to go for more information on that, because this is kind of a high level, what can I do sort of thing. So in this case, these bumps look fairly even. The value of the current is going to vary depending on how much fuel's in the tank, how much current it needs to draw in order to pump that fuel through the tank and so on. So there really isn't like a known good, but this is at idle, about 7 amps on the high end. So it goes up, goes down, goes down. Those are the commutators going by the brushes. I also know in this case, and the majority of automotive fuel pumps have 8 commutator segments in there. So there's segment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to 1 again. All right, so I know that that is one rotation of that fuel pump. Now, if I wanted to know how fast this fuel pump is turning, because that's going to affect volume, right? So the pressure in the fuel system is controlled by the pressure regulator. The volume is controlled by the speed of the pump. I spin the pump faster, I get more volume. I spin the pump slower, I get less volume. On this particular vehicle, it's also a variable speed pump. So depending on how fast it's going, well, you can deliver additional volume under a load if it needs to. There is a little math equation I'll just do really quick here. So it takes 7.57 milliseconds to go. So I'm going to pull up my calculator here. Now that's milliseconds, so 60,000 milliseconds in a minute. So divide that by 7.57. 7,926 RPM this thing's running. So that's a healthy fuel pump. Anything 5,000 to 6,000 RPM or better, you're in good shape. Anything 3,000 RPM or lower, you're not in so good shape. And that is due to the fuel delivery, the volume, right? Like I said, could still have good pressure. If I just do a pressure check on a car with a weak fuel pump, I might not catch it until I'm under a load, right? So the volume is key as well. And how about running compression? That's another one that's pretty popular out there. A lot of people want to learn how to do this test just because you can see a lot about what's going on inside the cylinder without having to take things apart. If I suspect I have low compression or something's going on, I can check it mechanically by doing this. So this is just the pressure wave in the cylinder as it's running. Now, in the real world, you want to make sure the fuel is disabled for this. So this would be more, or the fuel injector is disabled in this cylinder, right? Because you don't want to be washing down the cylinder because it's not firing because you're using the spark plug tube to read your pressure. But here's the pressure going up as the piston goes up, reaches top dead center. Somewhere in there, the coil would have fired, and then it's going to drive it back down, of course. Should see a little vacuum pocket down here. We're going to have some valve overlap. Then we get the exhaust flow. In this case, it's a 4-cylinder vehicle, so we see the 3 other cylinder pulses. Then we're going to have a little bit of overlap over here at the end of the exhaust stroke. Then we get our intake stroke. Comes down, pulls another vacuum pocket, then goes up, and then expands back down, and so on and so forth. So that is one time through the cylinder going through its thing. Now I decided, like I said, this is not advisable for you to do under normal circumstances, but it was my car. If I broke it, that's my fault. So I decided I wanted to see everything. So we got pressure on yellow. We got our current ramp on a coil. So this is where it fires right here. So that lines up a little bit before top dead center. And then my fuel injector is going to fire, of course, a little bit before my intake valves open. So it comes up, fires right about here. It's going to continue circling around and then come back down, build a vacuum pocket. There's my other 3 cylinders there. And then when the fuel injector opens, you can see some turbulence in there and the pattern changes because now I have fuel and air and turbulence coming into my engine. So I can see that detail. And then it's going to come back up and do it again. So I just thought that was kind of, I just wanted to see it all on the screen. You wouldn't normally do this, but I just wanted to see, hey, how does this affect that? How does this look? And what would it look like if I put everything on the same screen at the same time? So I thought that was kind of interesting. You can learn a lot about what's going on in a vehicle just by looking at the pictures on the scopes once you learn how to, use it and set it up. We got plenty of training on that. Now, however, we're going to go live on the tool. So we got a couple things we want to talk about here. All right, so first thing I want to do is I'm going to pop in a scanner. And I'm just going to pull up my demonstration. We'll do the Camry today. Don't need to do the Tahoe every time. Go in here and first we could do, remember how I said there's 2 different sides of the computer, right? So I got I'm in my vehicle specific side right now, manufacturer specific side. If I wanted to go just into OBD2, I would come out of here. I'd have to back out of my car as well and go into OBD direct. I'm not going to do that for this part though, because there's other ways we can do that. I could go into engine. Goes into the ECM, your codes and data and all that other stuff. On most vehicles, not all, but on most vehicles that support it, we have generic functions available as well. So if you click on that, that flips you over into that other room, which is like bursts a hole in the wall. So I got my radius monitors, mode 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 9. So no mode 5, 7, or 10, right? So you get most of the modes, but not all the modes. If you wanted to get those directly, you can go over into OBD Direct and do it that way. But, even mode 6 information is available in there. I'm not sure if this works on the demo vehicle. I'm thinking I can't. I'm thinking I can't. No, I cannot. Okay. Let's go back in there. Okay. So, other thing we can do is if we do like a code scan. Just going to scan through all the systems for codes, of course. Comes up. So I got engine, I got 2 codes. And if I scroll down on our tools, we also check mode 3, which is OBD2 codes, and we also check permanent codes, which is mode 10. We also show you the readiness monitors on here. So that is all in one page, all on one screen, all in one scan. That's helpful for in this example. No OBD2 codes. But I got OEM codes up here. Now, this is because it's a demo vehicle, but that is feasibly possible. I've been on GM vehicles where that was the case, where I had a couple in the OEM side and I had nothing on the generic side. And I've been on other vehicles where it was vice versa. So you got to make sure you check them all because you might miss something. If there's no codes in engine and then you scroll down and you see, oh, there's 3 codes under OBD2, well, I guess that threshold didn't get met under the OEM side, right? So we talked about earlier. Also through here, from the code scan screen, you can tap on the name engine, and it brings you back to that menu we were in before, and you can go into generic functions that way as well. So that's pretty helpful. All right, let's say we go into data here. Let's say I wanted to look at an oxygen sensor. Let's say I wanted to look at, like, I don't know, where is it? It's down a little. Bank one. Oh, it's over here. Bank one, sensor two, right? So in this case, this is, once again, it's a simulator. Don't look at the voltages because they're way out of where they'd be, but let's just say that's okay for this example. Let me come over here. I'm going to pull up my guided component tests. And actually, I'm going to pull up a 2016 Camry, so I'm going to do... yeah, we can do this. It's fine. It should be fine. Engine, because this pulls off the Tahoe. Actually, no, I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to go through here and do it this way. So, Toyota Camry, 2016, Toyota Camry, that one. Okay. Engine. I will go to, oxygen sensor. There we go. Rear O2 sensor. Component information. Sensor is zirconia type sensor used to monitor exhaust gases for the presence of oxygen, depending on the level of oxygen used downstream. Voltage range to be a tenth to 0.9 volts. That's why I said pay no attention to the actual values on that. And then it gives us the pinouts. And then it also gives you a service note. If connectors are not available, check tech notes for alternative connective locations. So if I wanted to do, say, a sensor test and like a bench test, or you can do an in-car test, I suppose, I can go in there and you can see should be this, add some propane, and it should do 600 millivolts in 15 seconds. That's just checking the ramp on it, basically. Yellow oxygen sensor signal, black tick sensor ground, heavy meter. We could do this. We could do this in the car too, and just check the voltages. For some reason, it doesn't show any car tests, and for some reason, I'm not seeing any. Oh, because it's tenths of a volt. Never mind. All right, so we'll go way down. There we go. So now we got a signal. Tenths of a volt. So let's say it's like 2/10 of a volt right now. Open up my meter, hit my meter again, makes it a window. I come back over here, my scanner, and I got to reload this car. All right, and then we'll go to engine, and we'll go to data, and we'll go to AF sensor data. And oxygen sensor bank one, sensor two is the one we were looking at before. Can even make it full screen if we want. That makes it a little easier. There we go. So we can see it's bouncing up and down and all around. And come down here, find my scope viewer. There. Interesting. That's a Windows thing. All right, so I see 0.3 of a volt. Now I want to compare these on the same screen. So I'm going to snap this one over there just like that. Take this guy and go over there. Now I can see the difference. Now if in this example, I'm reading a solid 0.3 volts, I'm at idle, and it's just kind of doing its thing, then maybe it's all right, maybe it's flatline. Maybe I want to rev the engine and see if it responds. However, if it does respond and everything looks good at the sensor itself, and then I don't see good, I see a bunch of garbage like this coming out the back of the computer, I know I've probably got a problem with the computer. However, if I was at the sensor and I saw it doing a bunch of stuff like that, kind of matching what was going on the other side, then I know it looks good going in, looks good going out, right? So just compare and contrast, ins and outs. That's what we need. So we need to look at the scanner for anything going out. We need to look at the scope for anything going in, sometimes going out. Depends. So that is scanner versus scope. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about next week. Next week, we are back on our OEM specific ADOS training, and our subject will be Honda next week. So please make sure you join me for that. We're going to talk about all the ins and outs and differences between Hondas and all the other manufacturers we've talked about, and all the other manufacturers we're going to talk about throughout the year as well. This will be a year-long series about every other week. So please join me if you wish. 6 and 9 Eastern if you want to go. go to snapon.com/OT to register. It also has my schedule of classes there too. So that's kind of helpful. If you want to register for Zoom, go there. Otherwise, the 6 p.m. class goes to our YouTube channel, which is right there. You go to our youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics, or just scan the QR code. That'll bring you there. And 9 p.m. Eastern class goes to the Facebook page. So it is Facebook. It is Snap-on Diagnostics Products and Training. That's what they changed it to. So you can find that on Facebook. If you want to see any of the other episodes in the series, we got 114 now, I believe it is. So anywhere from intro to ADOS through our ADOS specific training, this class is up there. Anything in between, it's all free. They're all roughly half an hour long. So if you want to get some free diagnostic training, that's definitely a good way to go. Once again, youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics. Do we have your email address? If we do not have your email address, then you're missing out on some valuable diagnostic related content, such as technical focus articles, Sure Track blogs, quick tips, new product release alerts, and they send out my schedule periodically. Yeah, we do have a new product out there. It's called the Triton. It's pretty cool. Hey, guess what? It has a scanner and a scope. Go figure. But if you are missing out on these emails, here's one for like diagnosing timing chains. You can scan that QR code. It'll bring you to a little page you can fill out, and then we'll be able to capture your email. And then you'll start getting these valuable emails. We don't spam you like 5 times a day like some people do. It's maybe a couple times a month. We don't send out a ton. And, just get that valuable content. All right, time for questions. Before we do, I just want to make sure that if you did join early or late on Zoom, find that Q&A button if you got a question, and then type it in there, and I'll get to those in a second. And YouTube, feel free to use the live chat. I do want to mention my buddy Keith, who also does free training. And his is based on the scan tool. So Wednesdays is Zeus Plus. Thursday is Triton and Apollo series tools. He goes from everything from soup to nuts. The first hour is talking about set up your tool, Wi-Fi, security link, Snap-on Cloud, all those good things. Then he walks through the scanner portion of things. So that's about an hour. Then he takes a 5-minute break, and then the rest of the class, about 45 minutes or so, is all on scope functions on the respective tools. So definitely worth your time if you want to learn a little bit more about the tool you got. So with that, let's get to questions. So looks like I got one on Zoom. Oh, Jay says, thanks for the class. Jay, thanks for attending as always. You always seem to chime in there, so I appreciate you continuing to increase your diagnostic knowledge there. All right, let's go to YouTube. Dan Cujo says, hello, everyone. And he also asks, can you use the Zeus scope as standalone like Autel or Pico? So, no. And on Autel and Pico, you can't use them separate either, if I'm not mistaken. You need the software, right? You need the software to use it. So the Autel, I know, you can't even open the software until you plug in the scope. And on the Pico, the software is free, but you can't use it until you have the scope. So I don't know where you're kind of getting at. Now the Zeus is a separate module that's tethered over USB, if you're asking about that, right? So it's not part of the tool anymore like it used to be. Well, it was still removable, even on the original ones, though, it was still removable. But it is USB tethered now, if that's the question you're asking. So it is separate, but you can't use it like separate from the Zeus, right? It has to be used in combination. So hope that clears that up. Nick saying hello from England. It is very late, Nick. I know you can't sleep when there's good content to have, and I also appreciate you showing up every week as well, Nick. So definitely appreciate it. Let's see. Fernando Ramos says, thank you, Jason Gabrias, for distinguishing between scan tool and scope. You're very welcome. I know sometimes there can be like, where do I use it? How do I use it? That sort of thing. So hopefully this clears a little bit of it up. Nick says, thanks for the free training, Snap-on. Dan also asks, do I have to use an attenuator when scoping injectors or secondary ignition? No, you do not. On our tool, it is all kind of built in to it, so you don't need to worry about it because you're not hooking directly up to that. Let's see, is a Triton D10? Yeah, so you don't need an attenuator on a Triton either. All of our scopes are internally essentially the same. It's just a matter of number of channels. Let's see, and then let's see. Please talk about brake by wire. All right, that's a good suggestion. I'll write that one down because I do need a couple. I do need to schedule a few other classes. That's a good one. Let's talk brakes. I don't know if I've talked about brakes in a while. I'll write that one down. Thanks, Nick. And then Dan says, yes, I mean using a software on a Windows computer. Does Snap-on have a Windows scope? Yeah, it's the Zeus. Because the Zeus runs Windows. So we don't have it separate where you can just buy the scope and then download the software like Pico does. I'll tell, like I said, as far as I know, you can't use that on a Windows computer, as far as I know, unless something's different. But I know the Pico for sure because the software is free. You put that on any Windows computer, but you still need the scope itself to use the software, right? So can't use the Zeus scope separate on a Windows computer because you would need the Zeus software to operate it anyways. And we don't sell the Zeus software for just any Windows PC. It has to be on a Zeus. So hopefully that clears that up. Because I think there was a little confusion there. And then Matt says, thanks for all the training. So thank you, Matt, for always showing up as well. You show up very often for these live streams, and I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you very much. It's been what, 5 years now, right? Let's see. Jason says, can we use Zeus Plus for vibration diode like Pico? You could. You would need adapters that would plug into the Zeus, and you'd get 4 channels worth of NVH. We don't make any adapters for NVH. I've kind of been asking for them, but we used to have this standalone thing called a Thebus years ago. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that got discontinued sadly. But if you can get the NVH adapters to connect to the Zeus, yeah, you sure could. It's just 4 channels of voltage, right? So I mean, any scope would be able to do it. So yeah, Zeus would be able to do it. We don't have, like I said, we don't have the adapters. But if you get adapters with banana jacks on them that plug in, sure, it certainly would work. Thanks for the question. Let's see. So will Snap-on get topology like top-down where they visually show what modules are on what networks? So maybe. It's been asked for. It's all a matter of what engineering does. I will tell you, I have been playing an awful lot with our competitors these last couple of months because we're working on some projects. And I will say that the way that Launch and TopDom presents topology has nothing to do with how those computers are set on a network. It is just categories. So take a look at it next time. It's going to say powertrain. It's going to say brakes. It'll say this, that, and the other. Definitely not how that network is set up on that car. Now, I will say with Autel, they have improved it. And many vehicles, it does kind of show at least what pins it goes to. Still not necessarily the exact map of the vehicle, but it's closer than what you get with top-down or launch. I will tell you that. And then as far as ours, we're going to show you all the modules on the vehicle, and we're going to show you which ones communicate, which ones don't, which ones have codes, and which ones don't. So we're not doing much different, just don't have the pretty picture, I guess. But yes, maybe in the future. I don't know for sure. And then Nick says, pick up your oscilloscope every day. I would say that's a very good. Yeah, get used to it. Use the scope. Plug into things, especially like new vehicle or known good vehicles. That's what I want to get to. Known good components, so you know what it's supposed to look like. So when you come across a broken one, say, hey, that don't look right. That way you can learn with that, right? Yeah, still likes the list. I get you. All right. So with that, thank you very much for taking a little bit of time out of your busy day to spend a little bit of time with me. Hopefully you'll join me next week for ADOS on Hondas. With that, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a nice night and take care.